Okay, Steve, what I'm going to do now before we actually commence the second session is just to recap on the first. Basically, what we did, we covered the whole approach in terms of the history, the philosophy, and we mentioned some of the principles, some of the tools, and some of the assumptions used in the approach. Now, we know the approach is actually practiced universally, and each and every practitioner has his own variation of the process developed by the Milwaukee team. Your model is called GEMS, which actually stands for Goals, Exceptions, Miracle Question, Scaling Questions. And now, can you possibly give us a brief summary of each of those 4 elements?
Yeah. Something that happened when I'd been doing training for a short while was people were saying, well, that's great, it's a really nice approach, we like this. However, Friday afternoon, something goes wrong, how do I remember all this? And it seems as if everyone's got an acronym. So what we know is in solution-focused conversations, we're looking for resources, we're mining for people's competencies, and we ask a lot of noticing questions. So in a fit of inspiration, came up with this idea of noticing gems. So it's almost as if you're in a diamond mine where you have to sift through an awful lot of dirt and rubble before you find that diamond. So it's noticing gems. Noticing is about the aspect of solution-focused practice where we ask people noticing questions. So what have you noticed that's better since the last time we met? When do you notice that problems aren't so severe? When do you notice other people are more helpful? So those kind of questions are good, because what we know is that when someone says, I've noticed this, it becomes real. They may not have really focused on that previously. So it's very, very powerful questions to ask. The G in GEMS, as you say, is about goals. And it's being incredibly respectful of the individual's goals. So I might have a set of goals as a practitioner. I want the person in the chair to be doing better, whether that be in a health situation or supervision or coaching. But I've got to put that to one side really and concentrate on the individual's goals. And what we find is if we concentrate on the individual's goals, then they usually coincide with ours, because most people want to do better. It's just that they may not realise at the time that can happen. E in GEMS is for exceptions, and this again is part of that uncommon sense that we were talking about in the previous programme. It's the times when the problem doesn't happen, or the times when it happens a wee bit less, or the times when it happens just as much but the person copes with it better. So a good example of that would be chronic pain. So someone who's got back pain that is very difficult to treat with medication and exercise, one of the approaches we take is to ask exception questions, and that can be incredibly rewarding for the individual, because they might have been focusing so much on the times when it's painful that they haven't noticed the times when it's less painful. So an example recently was talking to someone about chronic pain, and what they'd noticed was that they experienced less pain when they went to visit the friend. And when asked for a description of that, and they gave me lots and lots of description about it, it was the short walk there, the fact that they felt more relaxed, and the friend had got a more comfortable chair. So one of the interventions was borrow the chair from the friend and continue to go and visit the friend. So that's an example of exception seeking. The miracle question was developed by Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kimberg, who we mentioned previously, the architects of the approach. And we tend to use that as a way of finding out what would people want if there were absolutely no constraints. So it's taking a step out of the situation we're in now and just say, come on, if a miracle happened tonight, how would your life be tomorrow? And we get a description of that, and you go blow by blow, minute by minute through the day after the miracle has happened. That can sound a bit airy-fairy. However, The critical question is to say, so what parts of the miracle are already happening? And in the last 20 years or so, I don't think I've met anyone yet that couldn't identify some part of the miracle that was happening. So in a very, very desperate case I was working with, asked someone the miracle question, it was 1,000,000 miles away from where they were at that point. And I was struggling to think to myself, well, what parts of that miracle are already happening? And when I asked her the question, she said, well, I'm still breathing, I'm still alive, I'm here. And I think it's a miracle I'm still alive. So that gave us a foundation there, and it gave us a start point to work towards her preferred future, towards what she wanted to be doing. And that leads on cunningly to S for scale. So scaling questions are really big business. And I guess if I was on a desert island and someone said you can only take one question from a solution focused approach with you, it would be scaling question. And we tend to work on 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. I like 1 to 10 because you're already on the scale. I think 0 is inherently negative. And what we would do is ask someone to place themselves on that scale from 1 to 10. We would ask for a description of what that number is like. So if someone says I'm 4 out of 10, tell me about 4, and we would get lots and lots of detail about 4. And then we would ask what 1 point up the scale would look like and how that might be achieved. So that's the noticing gems framework, which is a useful way of remembering things. I'm just thinking from your coaching practice, how would you approach?
Well, I think the model fits in very, very nice with most of the other models, but I tend to actually use it in a slightly different way. Basically, I actually try and look at outcomes, because I actually think myself outcomes are actually dynamic, and it's about what life is about. Life is not a snapshot at the end of the day, and because outcomes are dynamic, then we've got to look at what we're doing to help people reach their outcomes the way they want their life to be. So in essence, from that, what I actually then do is basically try and look at small steps, which are in terms dynamic goals. It's a step forward. They've reached one goal. What is the next goal to reach my outcome? And because the outcome is dynamic itself, the goals themselves have to be dynamic. Now, one of the anecdotal stories in terms of small steps, or the next step approach, is the fact that Edmund Hillary was actually climbing Everest in the 1950s with Sherpa Tenzing, and he said he actually became expert at chasing or designing the next step. Because if you think you're on Everest and you're climbing and you fall into a crevasse, yes, you've got your outcome of actually wanting to get to the top of Everest, your goal. However, if you're not shaping your next step in a situation like that, then, and you're jumping too far ahead, then basically you could get lost. So he became well known, it was his phrase, he became master of the next step. The other part that we talked about, the scaling question, is I've used it in a different way, but it tends to actually get the same result. I've used sort of a glass half full and a glass half empty. And obviously if we want to actually change that glass half full to a full glass, the glass with the water level in at half, then we're actually looking below the level of the water as to what resources we have available to actually reach the full glass. So we've got the skills, the expertise, all the resources are actually available to us to actually reach that. So although I'm using scaling, I'm using it in a slightly different way. And basically the miracle question I use in a different way. I've got the general gist of the miracle question, but the things I've actually been approaching have been more team building than individual coaching. I've used it in a slightly different way. So that's my take on it. Are you okay with that, Steve?
Yeah, sounds good.
Right, okay. Now, basically, that's your model, and as I say, I've using it in a slightly different way. We're going just slightly touching on something else, or we're continuing from that. The advantage of this solutions-focused approach is that it's so versatile. it can be utilised in many settings, such as individual coaching, team coaching, and in an organisational setting. What actually sets the approach apart from other approaches, and how come it is so versatile?
I think the one of the critical things is that solution focused doesn't mean problem phobic, and that's a quote from Steve DeShazer. So it's not that we ignore problems. However, what we do is we talk about how to deal with the problem, how to develop a preferred future. And I think with other coaching models, it is that the conversation is based on dealing with the problem. So it's a problem solving approach. And I think problem solving is diametrically opposite to solution building. So solution focused coaching is about building solutions, about achieving preferred futures, about topping up the half full glass to get more in it. Whereas the other models can be very, very useful, and it's not to try and discredit other coaching models, but coaching which works on how to improve everywhere in your life and how to solve the problems is inherently negative. I think another thing with non-solution focused coaching is that there's an emphasis on balance. So people very often will talk about the work-life balance, and that's okay if people want a work-life balance and if that's useful. I met someone for a coaching session a few years ago who had basically got rid of his former coach because she was insisting that he needed to spend less time at work and more time with his family. That would be okay for lots of people, but he didn't have a family. He'd been adopted. He didn't get on with his adoptive parents. He was in a hit and miss relationship, which was okay because she was an air hostess and he travelled a lot. So he didn't have a life outside of work unless it was those weekends and weeks away and 6 months off. So that model of work-life balance simply didn't work. And equally, a colleague was working with someone who was coaching an executive who'd been out of work for a while, who was looking for work. So the work-life balance was quite difficult for him because there wasn't any work. So with the solution-focused approach, what we tend to do is work on the goals of the individual, and I think that would be the biggest single difference.
What do you think the major impact of the approach is?
I think one of the certainly feedback from people who have used this approach on, if you like, both in both chairs, as coach and as the person being coached, is that people grow, and that sounds a bit fancy, sounds like something off a television program. However, people talk about the fact that they feel a sense of personal growth because they're doing more of the things that they do well. It's also very validating. We're all fairly modest people, I guess, and we aren't very good, as UK culture is that we're not very good at accepting praise. But we do like praise, even if we're not very good at accepting it. And with solution-focused coaching, it's not simply about praise, but it's about that person owning up to what they do right. So we can be good at owning up to what we do wrong or what we don't do very well, but helping people through a coaching process to own up to what they do right is incredibly empowering and builds people's self-esteem. And I think that is probably the greatest gift of solution-focused coaching.
May I stop you there for a moment, Steve? You're saying that is very interesting. I utilise it in a different way, or very similar way, because I actually believe that the impact of solutions focus, although in terms of using the word positive, it's about people's futures. And when we're actually looking at basically trying to help people out, we don't want in some ways to try and analyse the problems that they have. We want to actually help them build on the successes. And you're quite right in actually saying that in Britain we are actually reserved about enjoying our successes. I was only watching a video this morning of Ben Freeman, and he from Finland, and he actually has his own model as well. And one of the first skills he actually said that he actually teaches is basically how we can actually enjoy our successes.
Absolutely.
And basically, it's not just being selfish of enjoying our successes, of being happy with the successes, it's how other people, if we're making other people happy with our successes as well. And I think this is far more important than pathologising the problem.
Okay, thanks for that, Owen. We're just about timed out, so we've had a conversation about individual coaching and the way that what it is and how it compares with other approaches, and we'll pick up on some of the resources about coaching in a later programme.